Right, good evening and welcome to the Friday edition of Vogan's European Outlook. Another busy weekend coming up here on the channel. We've got the tropical outlook, but we're also going to talk about Storm Ashley. That's been newly named by the Met Office with significant potential impacts on Northern Ireland and particularly northern areas of the mainland UK as we progress through the course of later tomorrow evening and in through the day on Sunday. So there will be a tropical outlook / European outlook in tomorrow's video, and then we will be back to the live stream at 4 p.m. this Sunday afternoon. So that's 4 p.m. on Sunday with the live stream. It'll be the 113th edition of the Global Weather and Climate Report. We're going to be talking about all things global, a little bit of winter chat as well. But in today's video, we are going to be primarily focusing on winter 2024-25. The October update that has now been released on markvoganweather.com is freely available. Just click onto the link in the description below and you can access this article. It is a little bit lengthy. There is a lot of work being put into this here, talking about some of the teleconnections, the significance of those teleconnections. And at the very bottom of the article, I talk a little bit about the prospects going forward with regards to this winter. Obviously, it's a winter update, so that is no surprise. But these are the teleconnections that is being looked at most years, but primarily this year in particular, we're looking at some of these important teleconnections here with regards to what type of influence they may have. So let's blow this up and we can see this as best as possible. So yeah, that's looking quite good, I think. Can we go one more? Let me just see here. So we've obviously got a solar maximum. We've got a very warm overall ocean. And I'll trim that back just slightly, actually, because it might be just too much. So we've obviously got a very warm overall ocean atmosphere. You know the drill by now. We've warmed things up over the last 10, 20, 30 years. And therefore that is having an influence on a global perspective. But this is the parameters that we've got in place. We're in a solar maximum at the moment here. I'll discuss why that is significant below. We've also got a positive Siberian snow cover. For the month of October, this is the highest Siberian or Eurasian snow cover since 2014, which again, I'll explain a little bit more about what relevance that has on the winter further within the video itself. The neutral Indian Ocean dipole, so we've got a uniform, largely uniform overall Indian Ocean at the moment here, so therefore we've neither got a negative or a positive Indian Ocean dipole here. It's generally neutral. We've got a weak central La Nina at the moment here, and at the moment we're borderline between neutral and weak La Nina territory here. Again, we'll discuss that going forward. West QBO, Western Quasi-Biennial Oscillation. We've also got a positive AMO or a positive Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation. So let's get right into it. As we progress through the October period, the various teleconnections we look at for the winter prediction becomes more important and interesting. Like I say, this is quite in-depth, so I do appreciate that it's not necessarily for everybody, but I'll try and go through it as quickly as possible, keep it as interesting as possible as well. So what are we looking for when it comes to a winter forecast? What is it that I look towards with regards to building the ideas and the forecast? It's not wish casting. It's not just kind of thinking, right, we're going to have a cold winter. Let's hype things up. Let's just get clickbait going. Let's say, beat the drum of a lot of, sources out there that are perhaps hyping a particular season up, whether it's summer, winter, hurricane season, whatever. This is based on a lot of research, a lot of hard work, learning from the past, and then trying to translate going forward. The problem that I have with regards to the ocean temperature anomaly at the moment is the fact that really once you go past even 4 or 5 years, there is very little that compares with the level of warmth that we've got in our global oceans at the moment. So that is, in a sense, skewing these parameters here, equatorial Pacific, the North Atlantic, Indian Ocean, West QBO or East QBO, the behavior, the Magellan Oscillation, we'll look at that as well, Siberian snow cover, solar maximum, Arctic sea ice extent. These are all parameters, I think, anyway, that were easier to kind of look at and then decipher a particular type of setup when the oceans were less warm than they are now. So that has to get taken into consideration, that the level of warmth that we've got now is definitely throwing a wrench in the works with regards to long-range forecasting here. No long-range forecast is perfect. The past couple of summers has been very good in terms of accuracy. Winter last year actually turned out not too bad until the middle portions of January. Then the El Nino really did take over the pattern. It overrode, is that the right word? Overridden the overall situation here. So we kind of threw out such things as the Magellan Oscillation once the El Nino really did start to take hold of the atmosphere. That warm water in the central and eastern portion of the equatorial Pacific then drove the overall global circulation through the back half of the winter season. Up until then, the MJO was a pretty good parameter. The MJO is a pretty good parameter at the moment. There will be a big test coming up as we move into the month of November, but essentially we're back to late October. We've got a named storm on our hands now that's going to affect the UK towards the second half of this weekend. You think back to the 24th, 25th of August, we had Storm in Lillian. That was a phase 4 into 5 Magellan Oscillation. We're in that same phase at the moment. We went from a record strong positive North Atlantic Oscillation during the month of August, where we had warm and dry across the southern UK, cool and wet across the north. Then we flipped it on its head. The MJO rotated, got stuck in phase 6. Then it went into phases 7, 8, and 1. That gave it a little bit of a kick to the atmosphere. And then we went from record strong positive North Atlantic Oscillation to record strong negative North Atlantic Oscillation. And there were several aspects that could be blamed for that. And I think the Magellan Oscillation has a lot to do with that as well. So let's look at the global sea surface temperatures first off here and see what they mean. So this is actually back to the 10th of October here, so it's about 8 days old, unfortunately. But you get the general idea. We've got an anomalous warm water over the West-North Pacific. We've got this cool pool over the Gulf of Alaska. That's that negative Pacific Decadal Oscillation signal. We've got warm overall North Pacific. We've got a slight tongue of cool just to the south of Hawaii here. But one thing that's really drawn my attention is this central cooling of the equatorial Pacific, not so much in the east, but over towards the central region. And this could be crucial in terms of where the MJO, the Magellan Oscillation, wants to sit here. But at the moment here, we're seeing quite a central-based cooling of the equatorial Pacific. So we're borderline, like I say, between neutral and weak El Nino territory. The Atlantic overall is warm. We've got that ribbon of slight cool in the wake of Hurricane Kirk. Very warm waters, especially in the western portion of the tropical Atlantic into the Gulf of Mexico. We've got a little bit of cool just off Florida here, thanks to Hurricane Milton. But the core of warmest, you notice here that both North and North Pacific and North Atlantic reflect a very warm western portion of the basin here, which is quite interesting to see. So let's move on here. Like I say, let's start with the North Pacific. And first off, note the exceptional warmth south of the Aleutians towards Japan, but cooling in the Gulf of Alaska. This could be a positive for coal lovers. The reason why I say that is, see when you've got warm waters up towards the North Pacific into the Gulf of Alaska, that sometimes drives a ridge of high pressure. We've seen this in 2013, 2014. Very strong ridging up into Alaska. We had the stratospheric warming. We did see the polar vortex drop into the central and eastern United States. It was a very cold winter in 13, 14 for the eastern United States. But problem was that we had a big clash between warm in the Caribbean, cold over the mainland United States. That drove a very strong zonal jet stream across the Atlantic and into the UK and Ireland. And incidentally, it was one of the stormiest winters on record for the UK. One storm after another was seen flooding in response to that. It was a very, very wet, windy winter for the UK and Ireland. Incidentally, it was a very cold winter for the United States here. But what you have is, when you've got that, I failed to kind of explain that. What you have is, you tend to have more negative over the North Pacific region up towards the north portion of North America, towards Greenland as well. And you've got a better setup for cold into Western Europe when you've got a cooler signal over the Gulf of Alaska here. So it's important that we don't see these waters warming up, because that could see a repeat of the winter of 13-14. The overall Atlantic remains very warm. We're still in a positive AMO, the warm phase that we've been stuck in for the best part of 30 years now. This profile has been very persistent for the past 24 months. Record warm sea surface temperatures. By that I mean record warm. That standout warm pool east of Newfoundland may help in supporting a block and high over the North Atlantic extending into Greenland. So that warm pool to the east of Newfoundland may help bring on more region over the North Atlantic, extending into Greenland. Looking at the Indian Ocean, as I've already explained, we've got a generally warmer than average Indian Ocean. So I talk about the equatorial Pacific. The strongest cooling appears to be central-based La Nina is possible. The reasons for a stalling of the La Nina development in the likely distortion of the wind flow, likely due in part down to the Magellan oscillation. So we've seen the La Nina stall, the progress, the development. The reasons why is probably because of where the MJO has been positioned. That's distorted the wind flow at the surface, and therefore it stopped out those strong easterly winds from allowing those cold waters to upwell to the surface. So the MJO probably playing a part in terms of stalling the development process, the progress of the La Nina. And I'll kind of skip through this here because I don't want to just read it word for word. But there is a strong relationship between the MJO and the ENSO, or Southern Oscillation Index, as well as the El Nino overall situation here. El Nino, La Nina, Magellan oscillation kind of works hand in hand with that. But you can see here that the sea surface temperatures within Nino region 3.4, which is the region that NOAA and the Bureau of Meteorology look at to distinguish between an El Nino, a neutral, or a La Nina state of the Pacific Ocean. This is going to be critical. However, with the MJO returning to the ocean and maritime continent, we've seen that shift into the phases that are delivering this mild period at the moment for both Eastern North America and Western Europe here, like we observed throughout much of August. So back in August, we were in a very similar state in terms of the MJO, even the type of weather pattern that we're seeing. Strong negative troughiness, Greenland, Iceland, strong region, Azores up into the western side of Europe, delivering milder than average conditions. But this MJO back into the Indian Ocean and around the Indonesia region is likely going to help with the easterly winds, and we're going to likely see the La Nina increase in strength. You can see here that there's generally an 80% chance of La Nina being present in the October through December period, the November through January period as well, and then you see the likely drop off during the middle and second half of the winter season. Look, most of the models suggest a weak La Nina is likely this upcoming winter season here. The CFSV2 and the NMME model for the upcoming 3 months shows that there's a east central La Nina likely to be present. This is between November and January. So you notice here that the coldest waters within the equatorial Pacific is generally focused towards the date line here. The further west this cool pool goes, I think the less, based on just purely this, not looking at the stratosphere or anything like that, the further west you get that cold pool, the more likely you're going to have the MJO stuck in the warm phases, and therefore more likely to be a positive Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation. The NMME, like the CFSV2, indicates a central-based Pacific cool pool. So a weak central La Nina looks likely. There's a direct relationship between ENSO and the MJO. When the ENSO is either strong positive or strong negative, so either a strong El Nino or a strong La Nina, the effects of the MJO tends to be less. It has been said that all of the below likely was kick-started by a rise in the SOI mid to late August, providing a nudge to the MJO. So we've seen the SOI, or the Southern Oscillation Index. This is a measure of air pressure at the surface between Darwin in Australia and Tahiti in the South Pacific. When it's negative, the atmosphere is reflective of El Nino. When it is positive, the atmosphere is reflective of La Nina. And during the month of August, we've seen the atmosphere going from an El Nino to a La Nina base state. And I think this kind of kick-started the pattern that we've seen throughout the month of September and October in particular. So what's been happening from tropics to pole to stratosphere? September through the middle of October. And this is the building blocks to the winter ideas here. The reason why I'm talking specifically about what's going on now is important for further down the road. So we cannot underestimate the power of the MJO. This has undoubtedly, so this is the Mond-Julian oscillation, this has undoubtedly become an integral tool in my mid to long range forecast, and it works pretty well for the most part. And like I say, you have to emphasize that term most part, because it isn't always a player. When it's in the null phase, it has less influence in the mid to high latitude pattern. But when it's quite amplified, moving through the warm phases, it tends to lead to a positive Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation. When it's in the west, the Central Pacific, when it's in phases 7, 8, and 1, that tends to lead to more of a negative Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation here. We've seen both the negative and the positive of both the Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation in response to the MJO. A seemingly simple rainfall stroke thunderstorm enhancing atmospheric wave propagating eastward through the equatorial Indian and Pacific Oceans releases heat northwards, which can dictate the jet stream strength, position, and amplitude, therefore dictates the upstream and downstream wavelengths, in other words, the ridges and the troughs. It even dictates tropical cyclone productivity globally, as well as the El Nino and La Nina. So this is the relationship between the ENSO and the Mond-Julian oscillation, and it even has influence on our stratosphere and the polar vortex. So this is obviously what is known as a stable or strong polar vortex. Tend to have a lot of the cold bottled up within the Arctic region. You've got winds strong circling around it. You tend to have more zonal flow, mild continents, and mild regime overall. When you've got a weak polar vortex, the winds around it are weaker, and therefore you allow intrusions of subtropical air towards the pole, Arctic air towards the equator. This is the various phases of the MJO, ranging from 1 in the west portion of the Indian Ocean through phases 4 and 5. That tends to be milder phases. Then as it moves into phases 6, you've got more blockiness over the UK, Ireland. I expect that type of pattern to develop over the next week or so into phases 6. And then once you go into phases 7, 8, and 1, that tends to lead to more amplification of the overall pattern and a more blocky high latitude pattern. That then tends to have influence on the stratosphere. This here is a diagram showing the different phases of the MJO here. And this is where it correlates to. So a phase 3 and 4, which we're in at the moment here, positive North Atlantic oscillation, we've got that. Mild and unsettled, we've got that. And weak, we've got strong westerly winds here. It tends to be a stormy setup, and that is exactly what we have at the moment. And then once you move into phases 6, blocking high pressure, UK and Europe in general. And this is where we've been. So we were back in August here. This is the kind of pinky colour showing between the 20th and 25th. We went from phases 2 into phases 4, or phases 3 into 4. And we've seen Storm Lillian. We've got Storm Ashley on the way during the course of this weekend. And then I would expect a blocking pattern to develop here. So we're starting to rotate back through the phases that we've already been in. So let's take a look at August here. As an example, I believe that we're back into the August setup at the moment, mid-October. Stuck in phases 2 and 3, then phases 4 and 5, which is Indian Ocean to Indonesia. We had a strong upward motion over the Indian Ocean and the maritime continent, while strong subsidence over the Central and East Pacific. Surface winds blowing eastward across the Pacific helped cool the equatorial Pacific, and this provided a kick to the developing La Nina and atmospheric response above with the SOI. We also saw a shutdown in the tropical Atlantic. We've kind of got that at the moment, obviously. due to the large-scale subsidence and a record-strong positive NAO. Then came September and October, and a shift in the MJO into phases 7, 8, and 1. So that was the upward motion moving into the West and Central Pacific. This resulted in a strong and reversal in the pressure pattern over the Arctic and North Atlantic, resulting in a negative Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation. Strong atmospheric mountains within the thin, so the further north you go away from the equator, the troposphere becomes thinner. There's less depth within the troposphere towards the North Pole. When you've got strong high latitude blocking within the troposphere, that tends to lead to a bulging within the troposphere, and that then can have frictional effects on the stratosphere, which is above the stratospheric circulation. When you decrease those mountains within the troposphere, in other words, you lose the blocking within the pattern, you then start to see less friction and the vortex becomes stronger. And that's exactly what we have seen. You notice this here. Winds, this is the mean zonal winds of 10 millibars, or up in the upper levels of the stratosphere. We went from record weak levels, likely in response to the strong blocking over the Arctic region. Then as we lose the blocking, you start to see those winds becoming stronger, going above average. But they are expected, as we move into the cold phases once again, for blocking to return to the Arctic and those mean zonal winds to become weaker. So I'm kind of flicking through. As I've already explained here, Storm Lillian was named on the 22nd of August, when we're stuck in the same phases that we have now. And we're going to discuss this in a bit more detail. Obviously, there's yellow warnings and there's amber warnings out for wind during the course of Sunday. There's that blocky pattern that we expect to see as we move towards the end of October, as the MJO rotates through phases 6. So as of the 16th, 17th of October, the MJO is likely to return to the west, possibly Central Pacific in the next 2 to 3 weeks. We are likely to see the return of a negative Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation. So you can see that here in the ECMWF. There's that upward motion now moving into the West Central Pacific. So you can see it propagating eastwards here. And like I say, those stratospheric winds may become weaker once again. That thick red line represents average. So we go slightly below average once again, possibly. That the blue thick line is the ensemble mean here. So this is the mean of all the members here, shows that kind of weakness as we progress through the middle and second half of November. Now, the longer range models, the Meteo France shows a weaker polar vortex here through the middle portions of the winter, but the DWD, the German model here, represents that blue line is well below the average. And you notice here the general consensus is that we have a weak stratospheric polar vortex through the majority of December and January. So the question mark will be, while we expect the MJO to return to cold phases late October and November, with prospects of a negative Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation, and the possible weakening of the polar vortex again, is this temporary, or is it a part of a longer term trend? That is going to be the big question. Highest Eurasian snow cover for mid-October in a decade here. So you can see we're increasing the snow cover, particularly over the Siberia side as opposed to the North American side. We've got above average here. We've got below average over the North American side. The significance of this is that some research suggests that this expanse of snow cover, particularly during the month of October, increases the strength of the Siberian high, and therefore that can have frictional effects on the stratosphere as well. So this is a graphic here. You can read it at your leisure. Large expanse of snow cover over Siberia versus a small expanse of snow cover and the effects it may have. Solar maximum is another thing. We are in a solar maximum, which tends to lead to more of a stronger westerly flow and polar jet stream, but a solar maximum in combination with a westerly QBO. The west QBO is westerly winds blowing within the stratosphere over the equator. When those two are combined, that actually can lead to more of a favorable environment for a stratospheric warming event. And you can see here the various phases of both easterly and westerly. Westerly QBOs on themselves tend to lead to stronger westerly flow within the middle latitude, stronger jet stream, stronger polar vortex, etc., etc. However, when you've got an easterly QBO, that tends to have the opposite effect. It creates some sort of a friction within the polar jet stream. But again, the combination of solar maximum and west QBO, for some reason or another, tends to favour more of a weaker and more likely Arctic oscillation, negative Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation. So quite interesting. We've got the strongest solar maximum since the maximum of 2001. We're in a maximum at the moment of cycle 25. It's stronger than 24, but it's weaker than cycle 23, if that makes sense to you. Kind of rattling through this pretty quickly, unfortunately, because I'm watching the clock. I do need to head out the door shortly. So I do apologise for the fact that this is a little bit quick, but there's a couple of interesting things here. This is part of a blog post from Dr. Joe DeLeo of Weatherbell, talking a little bit more scientific stuff with regards to solar maximum versus solar minimum. We've also got high levels of ozone within the atmosphere due to that solar maximum as well. That can have warming effects on the polar stratosphere. So there is quite a lot of conflicting ideas when it comes to this upcoming winter season. And the weak La Nina, definitely interesting. I would have preferred to see an east-based La Nina as opposed to a central-based La Nina. When you've got an east-based La Nina combined with west QBO and a solar maximum, you tend to find that we've got a greater chance of seeing both a negative Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation, and stratospheric warming events. That central Pacific-based La Nina tends to focus the Manjulian oscillation over phases 3, 4, and 5. Those phases of 3, 4, and 5 tend to lead to more of a positive North Atlantic oscillation, Arctic oscillation as well here. So what do we know? We know that we've got a solar maximum. We know that we've got a west QBO, and we've got a neutral to weak La Nina this upcoming winter season here. So we remain in a neutral borderline weak La Nina at present. The core of cooling appears to be focusing towards the dateline or Central Pacific. Where will the MJO position and how amplified? A central-based La Nina wouldn't be particularly good news for cold lovers. The reason is that this could focus the MJO, as I've said, between the Indian Ocean, where we have the uniform above average waters, to the maritime continent. So that's phases 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. We're in 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 at the moment. This is leading to quite a strong Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation, strong jet stream, etc., etc. These are very positive NAO phases with an active storm track across the Atlantic into Western Europe, low pressure near Iceland, high pressure near the Azores. However, with a solar maximum and high ozone concentration within the polar stratosphere, combined with west QBO, which promotes greater chance of a weaker vortex within the stratosphere and winds which could override any central-based La Nina. So there's quite the fight here. There's quite the battle in terms of the ideas that I've got at the moment here. Anyway, or even the MJO as a whole. Overall, the MJO doesn't always have influence. Remember back to last winter, it played out well for more so than any polar vortex influence. So actually the MJO, I think, drove the late autumn into early winter. Remember, we had quite a cold spell in November. We had a very cold first half to December. Then it moderated as the MJO went into phases 4 and 5. Do you remember that? We had the coldest spell in early December since 2010, back last December, by the way, during late November, December, and even January. Then came the delayed but not denied overwhelming influence of El Nino. This squashed the other teleconnections influences, including the MJO. So my overall thinking is that we've got a cold first half of the winter coming up. The big question mark is going to be the behaviour of the polar vortex. Will it strengthen and will it stay strong? If it does so, it's going to be a mild winter overall, mild, wet, etc. But do we continue to see this influence of the solar maximum west QBO combination? Do we see a sudden stratospheric warming? If we do, we could have a major cold spell coming up sometime January, I would expect. So my thinking is cold November, for the most part, maybe ups and downs in terms of cold versus mild. I think we're going to have spells of cold into December, and then the big question mark becomes later down that road. So I hope you've enjoyed today. I know it's a bit long-winded. I hope it's made sense to you. I will be back tomorrow with a brief tropical outlook, and also we're going to look at the storm Ashley and the possible influences it may have on the UK. And then we've got the live stream at 4 p.m. this Sunday. I hope you can join me for that. Like, share, and subscribe. See you next time with more. Bye for now.